Bedtime stories for kids. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once upon a time, in a land nestled between snowy mountains and deep green forests, there stood a grand castle where a gentle queen lived. She was beloved by all for her kindness and grace, and though her life was full of riches and silk, there was one wish that echoed endlessly in her heart: the wish for a child. One winter morning, as delicate snowflakes danced from the gray sky, the queen sat by her window, embroidering roses into a piece of linen. The window frame was made of ebony wood, dark and gleaming, and outside, the snow fell softly over the garden. She pricked her finger with the needle by accident, and a bright drop of blood stained the snow on the windowsill. "Oh," she whispered, gazing at the red on the white, "if only I had a daughter with skin as white as this snow, lips as red as this blood, and hair as black as this ebony." As if the world had been waiting for her wish, a breeze stirred the curtains, and the light outside seemed to shimmer. In time, the queen gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The child's skin was pale as snow, her lips as red as the ripest cherry, and her hair black as a raven's feather. The king was overjoyed, and the whole kingdom rejoiced at the birth of their princess. They named her Snow White. But happiness was fleeting. The queen, weakened by childbirth, grew ill and faded like the last snow of spring. On a quiet morning, she closed her eyes for the final time, her hand resting gently on her daughter's cradle. The king was heartbroken, but he knew he had to be strong for his people, and for little Snow White. In time, he remarried, not for love, but for duty. His new queen was stunning to behold, with a face like marble and eyes like daggers. But beneath her beauty lay a heart colder than winter's breath. The new queen brought with her a strange object, an ornate mirror framed with gold leaves and silver vines. It hung in her private chambers, and each morning she would stand before it, wrapped in her silken robes, and whisper, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the mirror would reply in a voice like the wind over glass, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." These words pleased her, and she would smile with icy satisfaction. But little did she know, Snow White was growing more beautiful with each passing day. The girl had a light that came not only from her flawless appearance, but from her spirit. Gentle, curious, and full of wonder, she would wander the palace gardens, talking to birds and helping the gardeners gather flowers. Servants adored her. Even the sternest guards softened when she passed by. One afternoon, as the queen watched Snow White laughing among the roses, something dark coiled in her heart. "She is lovely," the queen murmured, her eyes narrowing. From that day on, she watched Snow White more closely, not as a stepmother, but as a rival. And so, the seeds of jealousy were planted, quiet and poisonous. Years passed, and Snow White blossomed into a young woman. Her grace only deepened, and the beauty she carried within her heart shone through her every smile, her every word. Her hair fell in soft waves of black silk down her back. Her eyes sparkled like morning dew, and her laughter was like a melody carried by birds through the trees. But more than her appearance, it was her kindness that touched all who met her. A kindness so natural, so warm, it seemed to light up any room she entered. The queen noticed. At first, it was just a passing unease. The way people turned to watch Snow White in the halls, how even noble guests bowed a little lower when greeting the girl. But then the whispers began. Maids exchanged glances. Courtiers made quiet comments. "She grows more beautiful than even the queen," someone said one day, not knowing the queen herself was just behind the tapestry. That night, the queen's steps echoed harshly in her chamber as she swept toward her mirror, rage coiling in her chest like smoke. She stood before it, her breath sharp. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror shimmered, clouds of magic swirling across its surface before the voice came. "You are fair, O queen, 'tis true, but Snow White is fairer still than you." The queen froze. "What?" she hissed. "Her beauty now outshines your grace, a kinder heart, a fairer face." "No," the queen whispered, her hands trembling. "She is just a girl, a child." But the mirror never lied. Its truth was final, and it pierced the queen's pride like a dagger. The next morning, she said nothing at breakfast, only stared coldly at Snow White across the long table. Snow White, unaware of the storm rising, smiled gently and offered her some fresh berries. "They're sweet, Your Majesty. The cook picked them just this morning." The queen took them but did not eat. Her eyes never left Snow White's face. Later that day, the queen retreated to her tower, where she paced like a trapped wolf, her mind twisted with dark thoughts. She could not allow this. She would not be overshadowed. She had ruled as the fairest for years, adored, admired, worshipped, and now, a girl, a child, threatened all of that. No, it would not stand. She summoned a servant, a tall man with eyes that avoided hers, and a blade at his side. "The girl," she said, her voice low and venomous. "Take her into the forest tomorrow." The man looked at her, confused. "To gather flowers?" he asked. The queen's smile did not reach her eyes. "No," she said. "To disappear. You are to take this box." She handed him a small, carved chest with a silver lock. "Bring back her heart, and place it here." The huntsman's hands grew cold as he took the box. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice tight, "she is but a child." "She is a threat," the queen snapped. "Do not fail me." And with that, the fate of Snow White was sealed. Or so the queen believed, but deep within that forest, another path awaited. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the palace courtyard as Snow White stepped lightly down the stone steps. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a small basket on her arm. Her cheeks were flushed from the cool breeze, and her eyes sparkled with innocence. The huntsman waited near the stables, a somber shadow in the morning light. His name was Ulrich, and he had served the royal family for many years. He had hunted wolves in the highlands and boars in the deepest woods, but never had he been given a task so heavy it turned his stomach. "Where are we going today?" Snow White asked as she approached him, her voice light and cheerful. "To the forest," Ulrich said gruffly, unable to meet her eyes. "Your stepmother wishes you to gather wild herbs for her tinctures." Snow White nodded, unsuspecting. "Oh, I know a lovely patch of thyme near the brook. The birds always sing there." They rode in silence for some time. The trees grew taller, the path narrower, until the sun barely pierced the canopy overhead. Eventually, Ulrich dismounted and helped Snow White down from her horse. "This way," he muttered, leading her deeper into the forest. Snow White skipped ahead, picking flowers as she walked, humming a soft tune. Her joy made his heart ache. Then, in a clearing surrounded by tall oaks, Ulrich stopped. "Snow White," he said. She turned to him, smiling. "Yes." He drew his dagger slowly, the silver blade catching the light. Snow White froze, her smile faded. What are you doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His hand trembled. "He couldn't do it. The queen. She ordered me to take your life," he choked out, his eyes filling with shame. "She is jealous of you. She wanted me to bring her your heart." Snow White staggered back, her eyes wide with shock. "No, she wouldn't," her voice cracked. "Why?" "Because you are kind," he said. "Because you are beautiful in a way she can never be." Tears welled in her eyes. "What will happen to me?" Ulrich looked around, then pressed a pouch of dried berries into her hand. "Run," he said urgently. "Run deep into the forest. Don't look back. Don't trust anyone who wears the queen's colors." "But where will I go?" she whispered. "There are old paths here, hidden places. Perhaps the forest will protect you." He knelt and clutched her hand. "Forgive me." Snow White touched his shoulder, her voice shaking. "You spared my life. I could never hate you for that." Ulrich watched her vanish into the woods, her blue dress flickering between trees like a ghost. He stood alone, the dagger still in his hand. Then he took a boar's heart from his pouch, one he had hunted that morning, and placed it in the ornate box the queen had given him. When he returned to the castle, the queen opened the box with greedy fingers. A strange, twisted joy lit her face as she stared into it. "At last," she murmured. "At last, I am the fairest once more." She never noticed the huntsman's pale face, or the way his hands clenched at his sides. But deep in the woods, far from the lies of the court, Snow White was running, breathless, frightened, and alone. Snow White ran until her legs gave way beneath her. She collapsed near a stream, her chest heaving, her hands scraped and trembling. The forest around her was vast and alive. Shadows moving between trees, birds shrieking overhead, leaves whispering secrets in the wind. She had never been alone like this. The palace, though cold at times, had always been full of people. Here, there was only the sound of nature and the pounding of her own heart. "I can't go back," she whispered to herself. "She find me." Tears slipped down her cheeks. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, a quiet strength began to stir in her. She wiped her face with her sleeve and stood, following the stream through the woods. Hours passed. Twilight painted the forest in purple and gold. Just when Snow White's legs felt ready to give out again, she stumbled into a small clearing, and there, nestled between moss-covered stones and tall wildflowers, stood a tiny wooden cottage. Its roof was thatched with dry straw, its windows round and glowing faintly with the warmth of the setting sun. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. Snow White hesitated. "Is anyone home?" she called softly. There was no answer. She stepped closer and knocked on the small wooden door. Still no response. I don't want to intrude," she murmured, placing her hand on the door. "But I have nowhere else to go." She pushed it open and peeked inside. The interior was cozy, though a bit untidy. A long wooden table stood in the center of the room, with 7 mismatched chairs tucked underneath. On the shelves were tiny mugs, small bowls, and neatly stacked plates. When she finished, the cottage looked transformed, clean, warm, and welcoming. She found a narrow staircase and climbed it to a small loft, where 7 tiny beds stood in a row, each with its own neatly embroidered name stitched into the pillow. Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey. 7, she smiled. 7 little beds for 7 little people. She curled up across 3 of them. She was much too tall to fit on just one, and pulled a blanket over her shoulders. The silence of the forest surrounded the cottage, but inside, Snow White finally felt safe. As she drifted into sleep, her last thought was a soft hope. Please let them be kind. Outside, night fell like a curtain, and the stars blinked into the sky, unaware that a new story had just begun in the heart of the woods. Just after sunset, as the moon climbed the sky and the stars sparkled like a million tiny lanterns, 7 figures emerged from the shadows of the forest, each carrying a pickaxe over their shoulder and humming a tune that echoed among the trees. They were the 7 dwarfs, miners by trade, guardians of the forest by heart. Each one had his own personality, his own way of walking and talking. But they were united by their loyalty to each other and the peaceful life they lived in their little cottage. "I can smell soup," said Happy, rubbing his round belly. "I can smell trouble," muttered Grumpy, narrowing his eyes. Maybe a bear broke in. Dopey mimed claws and growled softly, making the others laugh. "Let's be careful," Doc said, ever the leader, adjusting his spectacles. "Something's different tonight." They pushed open the front door and froze. The cottage was clean, very clean. The floor sparkled, the windows gleamed, the dishes were stacked, and the fireplace glowed warmly. "This is not normal," Bashful whispered. "Someone's been here," Sneezy said, and then immediately sneezed. "Bless you," they all said in unison, out of habit. Then they heard it, a soft sigh from above. Sleepy tilted his head and yawned. "Someone's upstairs." Tiptoeing one by one up the narrow staircase, they crept into the loft and gasped. A girl, tall and slender, her black hair like a river of silk, lay asleep across their beds. "Who is she?" whispered Bashful, his cheeks turning pink. "She's beautiful," Happy murmured. "She's in our beds," Grumpy grumbled. Suddenly, Snow White stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed from sleep and fear. She sat up and saw 7 little faces staring at her. Kind, curious, cautious. "Oh," she gasped, putting a hand to her chest. I'm so sorry. Please don't be afraid. I didn't mean to intrude." Doc stepped forward, his voice firm but not unkind. "Who are you, miss? And why are you sleeping in our home?" Snow White sat upright and clasped her hands in her lap. "My name is Snow White," she said quietly. "I fled into the forest. My stepmother, she wants me dead." The dwarfs exchanged looks of alarm. "Dead? Why would anyone want to harm someone like you?" asked Sleepy, blinking. "She's jealous," Snow White replied, her voice cracking. "The queen, she asked the huntsman to kill me, but he let me go. She's the one with the magic mirror," Doc muttered. "The queen who always asks if she's the fairest. She must have asked it one too many times," said Sneezy, and didn't like the answer. Snow White smiled sadly. "I had nowhere else to go. When I found your cottage, it felt safe." There was a long pause. Then Dopey, the smallest, stepped forward, holding out a freshly picked flower. She smiled and took it. Grumpy crossed his arms. "Well, I don't like it. It's dangerous having her here. If the queen finds out—" "She won't," Doc interrupted. "She could," Grumpy insisted. "She won't," Happy said firmly, "because we'll protect her." One by one, the others nodded. Even Grumpy, though he did so with a loud sigh. "If you're willing to help around the house," Doc said, turning to Snow White, "and you don't mind living simply, I would be honored," she said, her eyes shining. "I can cook and sew and sing and clean. You've already given me more kindness than I've known in a long time." And so, it was settled. In the days that followed, laughter returned to the cottage. Snow White sang as she swept the floors, her voice so sweet it made birds perch at the windowsill. She cooked delicious meals that filled the house with comforting smells, and she listened to each of the dwarfs, learning their quirks, their stories, their dreams. She grew especially close to Bashful, who stammered adorably whenever she spoke to him, and to Happy, who could always coax a smile from her, even when dark memories crept into her thoughts. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Snow White would tell tales of the stars, or sing lullabies from her childhood. The dwarfs listened in awe, their little hearts swelling with affection. "She belongs here," Sleepy murmured one night, already drifting off. But peace, as always, was fragile, and far away in the cold stone of the castle, a queen still stood before her mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And this time, the answer made her blood run cold. "You, my queen, are beautiful, it's true. But Snow White lives, and she is fairer than you." The queen's scream of rage echoed through the halls. The queen stood trembling in front of her mirror, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Her face, so perfect, so controlled, now twisted with fury. "She lives," she hissed, clutching the frame of the mirror. "That wretched girl, she lives." The mirror rippled with silver mist but offered no answer. The queen paced her chamber, her thoughts wild with anger. She had been deceived. The huntsman had failed her. Snow White, sweet, simple Snow White, had outwitted her. Worse, she was still the fairest. "I will not be outdone," the queen snarled. "I will finish the job myself." She descended the hidden staircase behind her chamber, a dark, twisting path that led to the old dungeons below the castle. There, in a secret room lined with arcane books, dried herbs, and potions that shimmered with dangerous colors, the queen began her wicked work. She flipped through ancient tomes, her fingers landing on spells of transformation. "Yes," she whispered, a wicked grin spreading across her face. "If beauty cannot destroy her, then ugliness will hide me." She brewed a potion, thick, foul, bubbling with green and black smoke. When it was ready, she poured it into a goblet and drank deeply. Her body twisted, her hands curled into claws, her face wrinkled, her voice became hoarse. When she looked into the mirror again, she did not see a queen. She saw a hunched old crone, eyes like coals, and skin like parchment. "No one will suspect me now," she rasped. She reached into her spellbook again, and found the perfect curse. One that would not wound or draw suspicion. One that would kill slowly, and beautifully. "A poisoned apple," she whispered. She chose the fairest, reddest apple from her basket, then dipped it into a thick, bubbling brew. As the apple emerged, its shine gleamed, flawless, inviting. "One bite," she murmured, placing it gently into a wicker basket. "One bite, and her heart will stop. But her beauty will remain forever, like a doll." Disguised, she left the castle under the cover of night. Meanwhile, in the forest cottage, Snow White was living in joy and simplicity. The dwarfs had come to love her dearly, and she loved them in return. Each morning, she rose early to bake bread, sweep the floor, and wave goodbye to them as they headed into the mountains. "Be careful," she would call. "Don't open the door to strangers," Doc always reminded her. "And no talking to anyone wearing a cloak, especially green ones." Snow White laughed. "I'll remember, don't worry." But that day, as she watered the herbs near the windowsill, she heard a knock at the door. It was soft, almost shy. She peeked out and saw an old woman in a dark cloak, hunched over, her basket full of apples. Snow White opened the door just a crack. "Hello," she asked. "Ah, child," the woman croaked. "I'm just a poor old peddler selling apples. Would you be kind enough to spare a cup of water for an old woman's thirst?" Snow White hesitated. The dwarfs had warned her, but this woman looked so harmless. "Of course," she said, and opened the door wider. "Come, sit down. You must be tired." The old woman smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "You're a sweet girl," she rasped, "and so beautiful. Here, let me thank you with a gift. Just one apple. The reddest and sweetest you've ever tasted." Snow White looked at the fruit. It gleamed like a ruby. "Oh, thank you," she said, lifting it to her lips. The old woman's breath hitched in anticipation. Snow White took one bite. The apple snapped between her teeth, crisp, perfect, and then she swayed. Her eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat, and the world went dim. She fell. The apple rolled from her hand across the wooden floor. The queen watched her body go still. She knelt beside her, eyes shining with triumph. "Now," she whispered, "no one will be fairer than I." She slipped quietly from the cottage, vanishing into the forest like smoke on the wind. When the dwarfs returned that evening, they knew something was wrong. The door was open, the house was silent, and upstairs, on the wooden floor, Snow White lay motionless, her skin pale, her lips red, her dark hair fanned out like silk. They ran to her, calling her name. "Snow White, wake up." "No, no, no, no. She's not breathing. She's cold." The 7 of them gathered around her, their faces crumpling in grief. Sleepy sank to the floor and sobbed. Bashful covered his face. Even Grumpy had tears on his cheeks. They could find no wound, no illness. Only the half-eaten apple nearby, glistening with poison. She was tricked, Doc whispered. They built her a glass coffin, laying her gently inside with flowers and a white silk pillow. They placed the coffin in the clearing outside the cottage, where the sunlight fell through the trees like gold. And there, they kept vigil. Days passed. Then weeks. They would not bury her. "She doesn't look dead," Happy would say quietly. "She looks like she's dreaming." "She's waiting," said Bashful. "Waiting for something, or someone." And so they waited. Spring had touched the forest once again. The snow had melted from the tree branches, and green shoots poked through the soil. Yet the clearing outside the dwarf's cottage remained still, almost sacred, guarded by 7 grieving hearts. The glass coffin stood among blooming flowers, protected by vines that grew as though they, too, loved the girl who lay within. Birds often perched atop the crystal lid and sang soft songs. Animals came and went, laying gifts of pine cones, berries, and feathers near her resting place. Snow White had not stirred, and still, the dwarfs watched over her. One morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, a sound of hooves echoed in the woods. A young prince, riding a white horse, approached the clearing. He wore a cloak the color of sky and a sword at his side, but it was the look in his eyes, open, honest, and quietly sorrowful, that marked him. He dismounted when he saw the dwarfs. I didn't mean to intrude," he said gently. "I've heard stories of a girl who sleeps in the forest. I thought they were just legends." "They're not," Doc replied. his voice low. "She's real, and she's gone." The prince stepped closer to the coffin. When he saw Snow White through the glass, his breath caught. He stood in silence for a long moment. Then he said softly, "I saw her once, just once, at the edge of a royal gathering. She smiled at me. I never forgot it." "You knew her?" asked Happy, surprised. "No, not really," said the prince. "But I remember thinking, there was something in her eyes. Like she saw the world as it could be, not as it was." He knelt beside the coffin, gently brushing a fallen petal from the glass. May I say goodbye?" The dwarfs exchanged glances, then nodded. They stepped back. The prince bowed his head. "You were light in a world full of shadow. Even though I barely knew you, I feel as if I've lost something precious." He placed a single kiss upon her forehead. And then, something happened. At first, it was a flutter, like the wings of a butterfly. Snow White's fingers twitched, her chest rose, her lips parted slightly. The dwarfs gasped, then she coughed once, sharply, as if forcing out the last breath of a deep dream. Her eyes opened. For a moment, all was still. She blinked up at the sky, then turned her head. Where am I?" The dwarfs ran to her, overjoyed, crying and laughing all at once. "You're awake. She's back. We thought we'd lost you." Snow White sat up slowly, dazed but smiling. "I remember. An old woman, an apple, the queen," Doc said grimly. "She tricked you. But you're alive," Bashful said, his voice breaking. The prince stepped forward, astonished. "I can't believe it," he said. You're truly alive." Snow White looked at him for a long moment. Then, softly, "I remember you. From the gardens. You bowed when no one else noticed me." The prince smiled, his voice trembling. "How could I not?" She reached out her hand, and he took it gently. "I think," she said, "we were meant to meet again." The forest bloomed around them. The birds sang louder. Even the wind seemed to dance through the leaves. And far away, in the dark heart of her castle, the wicked queen stood before her mirror one last time. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest now of all?" And the mirror spoke calm and final. "Snow White, who lives, is fairest of all. Her heart is pure, and you shall fall." The queen screamed, and the mirror shattered. News of Snow White's awakening spread like fire through the forest. Then across the hills and valleys, reaching towns and villages that had nearly forgotten the name of the girl who had once been a princess. The dwarfs helped her gather her things. Though their hearts ached at the thought of parting, they knew she had been given back her life for a reason, and they knew her journey wasn't meant to end in the forest. "Are you sure you want to leave?" Bashful asked quietly as she stood by the edge of the clearing, the prince waiting nearby. Snow White turned to him and smiled softly. "You've been my family, my protectors, my dearest friends. I will never forget you." Happy sniffled and tried to hide it by blowing into a handkerchief far too loudly. Doc stepped forward. "You'll always have a home here. The forest will remember you." She hugged each of them tightly, even Grumpy, though he tried to grumble through it. "You be careful out there," he said, his voice cracking. "And don't let that prince of yours take all the credit for saving you." Snow White laughed and kissed him gently on the cheek. "I promise." The prince helped her onto his horse, and with one last look back at the clearing, she rode with him toward a new future. The journey to the neighboring kingdom was quiet and thoughtful. The prince, whose name was Alaric, was not boastful or demanding. He listened when she spoke. He rode at her pace. He asked her about her dreams, and she asked him about the stars. In time, Snow White arrived at the court of Alaric's father, the High King. At first, the court was wary. She was the lost princess of a broken household, with rumors of magic and death clinging to her name. But then they saw her. They saw how she carried herself. Not with pride, but with quiet dignity. They saw how she knelt to speak to children, how she thanked every servant, how she wore no jewels, yet glowed brighter than any crown. The kingdom welcomed her with open arms. A great celebration was held when the king announced the marriage of his son to the girl who had survived death itself. Snow White wore a gown made of silk and starlight. The dwarfs were honored guests, given seats at the high table and wreaths of wildflowers. I told you she belonged with the prince, Sneezy said between sneezes. She belongs where she's loved, Doc corrected gently. And I think she's found that. After the wedding, Snow White stood with Alaric on the castle balcony. The wind tugging at her veil, the stars watching overhead. I never imagined a life like this, she said softly. But I always hoped that kindness would lead me somewhere safe. Alaric took her hand. And now you'll never be alone again. Far away, the wicked queen's castle stood in silence. After the mirror shattered, she had fled, her beauty twisted by the very magic she had once used to deceive. Her name faded into legend. A warning, a shadow, a story whispered to children who asked what happens when envy rules the heart. But Snow White's story lived on. She and Alaric ruled with grace and wisdom. She never forgot the forest, or the dwarfs, or the girl she had been. The one who had swept floors, and sung to sparrows, and believed in goodness, even when the world was dark. Every spring, she returned to the clearing. She knelt among the flowers, shared stories with the dwarfs, and sang to the trees. And every year, the forest bloomed brighter, because Snow White had lived, and love, once given freely, never truly dies.